Every few months we get to peer into the future of indie gaming through the Steam Next Fest. What's going to be hot and what's going to be not. A chance for indie devs to show us what they've been cooking up. Naturally, I gravitate towards the roguelikes to make up for some heinous sin in a past life. And every other fest I put together a video discussing some of what I played and what I think is worth looking out for. Today we have 9 roguelikes you might have missed during the Steam Next Fest, in no particular order, but I did put some of my favourites more towards the end. But let's take a look. Many moons ago, I reviewed a game called Earl vs. the Mutants. It too was a post-apocalypse, driving, survivor-like bullet heaven, and criticised the lack of tie-in to the post-apocalypse with a map that was devoid of anything hinting at the end of the world, architecture which you could drive straight through, limited upgrades, and an over-reliance on exploding enemies to inject some difficulty into the game. Did the devs of Driveloop see that video? As this game has a clear post-apocalypse theming, scenery that you can crash into, which quickly became my most common run ender, no reliance on blowing up enemies, boats and signs and bombed out buildings all sell this as the post-apocalypse. Your additional weapons come in the form of fellow travelers of the wastes, riding shotgun, sometimes literally, shooting any foes who approach the car. Alongside these road warriors are general upgrades which add abilities to just the car. It has a good bit of thought about how these changes fit into the world of Driveloop. So did it have a few missteps? The progress doesn't really keep pace with the enemies, so I felt pretty weak deeper into the runs. Maybe in the full game there'll be some sort of meta progression to amp up your character a little bit. But that's it really. There is a nice core, the driving feels solid and responsive and fun, the bosses in the trailers look really inspired, and setting this map up as Berlin with the iconic Brandenburg Gate, and then have the rest of the map as a desert, really sells the transformation this world has been through. I really need to revisit Fumes, as it seems high-speed post-apocalypse games might be coming into their own a little bit again in 2025, but in the end I enjoyed the core of Driveloop, and I look forward to seeing how it progresses in the lead up to its release, I presume, into early access in a few months' time. Katanaut is a slick, side-scrolling sci-fi samurai roguelike with a retro but brutal and gory art style. Think Dead Space meets Samurai Jack. These visuals are solid and the buckets of blood amplify the sense of power coming from your character. Slice your way through rooms of mutants and freaks collecting upgrades in the form of syringes and new powers like instant transmission and just an extra powerful strike. Fancy some ranged combat? Plasma pistols, shotguns and railguns round out a nice variety of tools to tackle any enemy. Fast combat, but impactful. Outside of these encounters, the game doesn't rush you too much. I'm not too hot on the character's animation, it's a bit stiff, a bit too upright, not much leaning in and force. There's some good enemy variety, but doesn't expand the roster much over levels, and future levels will feature most of the same enemies. It would be cool to get a bit of regional variety, but don't get me wrong, each new area does have new enemies, but the majority you've seen before. But yeah, I'm kind of nitpicking. I do really like the dark sci-fi feel, and had a good time with this one. It's quite simple when you boil it all down. Strikes, dodges through an enemy, hit them with a special attack, shoot them a few times, and then just kind of blend these into each other depending on the openings that you have. It will be interesting to see how it progresses into its release later this year. Okay, that was a nice break. Back into the survivor-likes. I do like survivor-likes, but they need to answer one main question, at least for me. How do you differentiate yourself against the pack? For Comet Force, not too long ago, being the space survivor-like would have been enough. But after walking in fields, flying through space now seems to be the second most common setting for these games. It does, however, embrace the more minion-based combat of something like Bone Razor Minions, where the combat revolves around your growing gang of flying saucers rather than solely depending on your own firepower. The graphics give me a sort of bowling alley scoring screen meets video games that you would find on CDs and cereal boxes vibe. As well as collecting minions, you can also build structures, which are meant to help you in combat, but honestly, they're so inconsequential, you're better off just investing in more sources. The sources do have different weapons and upgrades for each type, but it's not really the minion route like Bone Razor Minions, or another game we'll talk about later. The allied ships are no more detached from you as the weapons in something like Brotato. For me, the mark of a survivor like struggling in the combat department is when the game just descends into slowly revolving around a gang of enemies like a model train set going around a Christmas tree. This is where these games start to lose me, and here it just felt like the mechanics out with the core ships feel underdeveloped. Turrets are useless, any upgrades beyond more ships feels like a waste, or upgrading the ships other than that feels like a waste. And I eventually found myself tuning out and turning it off. So far from the demo, just didn't feel like it had the juice. Hopefully it finds that next gear over the course of the rest of its development, but very much a wait and see. Speaking of sea, let's talk about a pair of survivor-likes set at sea. As mentioned before, there are a few boxes that I think a new bullet heaven or survivor-like needs to tick to really justify their existence in an ever-expanding and overpopulated genre. As mentioned, an unusual setting or strong visual style, but also emergent gameplay and some uncommon mechanics which tie into the new theming can all help to set the stage for something a little bit different. So while Comet Force is late to the space party, I don't know of many nautical-themed survivor-likes. First up, Nautical Survivors. Strong visual style? Check. Solid emergent gameplay? Check. Uncommon mechanics which strengthen the theming? Check. Visually, I love this art style. With its limited palette, it's a joy to look at. The gameplay is solid. Here you have a boat and a crew. You can add cargo slots to fill with either weapons or crewmates who each bring unique effects. You have a central lighthouse which, as you upgrade, reveals more of the world around you, tying nicely the nautical theming into the gameplay. You also have island upgrade stations which either harvest gold or repair your boat when you're within range, or a shop for buying new weapons and upgrading existing weapons. So far so good. It is utilizing its theme and setting well, and on top of that it plays great, and it properly captures the feeling of captaining a boat on the water. So, great start. How about you, Ocean Survivors? Strong visual style? Not really, this doesn't really have a style, let's be honest. Well, how about some emergent gameplay? 3 separate upgrades, and that's as far as the demo showed. Not really much to emerge. I mentioned earlier that my mark of a bad survivor-like is if the gameplay devolves into just circling a cluster of enemies endlessly, and yeah, that's here. The only places the theming and mechanics cross over is that the boats tend to have a cannon on one side, so you have to get your cannon or cannons after some upgrades on the side without a cannon to avoid damage. Groundbreaking. The ship controls like, well, not a ship. If you're gonna set your survival like at sea in a boat, at least have it handle like one. Maybe comparing these two isn't fair, but even in a vacuum, Ocean Survivors does not justify its existence, but Nautical Survivors, I think absolutely does. I had to give them both a go when Steam recommended them both to me next to each other on the Steam Next Fest page, and I'm glad I played Nautical Survivors. I can see myself playing this on the Steam Deck at launch while listening to a few podcasts. Ocean Survivors, not so much. Okay, quick Side quest. During the Next Fest, I played some games that weren't roguelikes. I know, who am I and what did I do with Zep? Find out by liking and subscribing. But anyway, let's go through these in a sort of quickfire round. I'll reel off my thoughts about them and why I was compelled to speak about them here. Deliver at All Costs is a top-down delivery game which feels like if Crazy Taxi opened up a courier business. Visually, it reminds me a lot of the demo I played for the Precinct in the last Next Fest, whereas that demo was very hand-holdy and seemed keen to keep the player in a nice, neat little box. Deliver at All Costs felt a lot more open and freewheeling, warts and all, which I really respected. It's pretty wacky, but disguises it well on first glance. It acts like Saints Row 2, but looks like Mafia 2, but with the complete environmental destruction of something like Red Faction Guerrilla. You can tell which console generation I grew up with. This demo was a ton of fun, and I'm definitely looking forward to the full game. Not much to say here. This is a really good demo, and it's great. I really enjoyed it. Yeah, moving on. Controversial opinion here, but out of all the areas of A Song of Ice and Fire, every time the perspective switched to Jon Snow, my eyes would roll back so far into my skull. Jon's such a grim bastard, no pun intended, and I'd be speed reading through his thoughts and feelings, desperate to get back to another Tyrion chapter to cheer me back up. When this game called Kingsroad honed in on Castle Black, I let out an audible groan. And it didn't get much better. The first thing I see as I get into the game, a login bonus. Oh no, is this a mobile game? Yep, it turns out I've been had. Now, does it have serviceable combat and quite an expansive looking world? Sure, but the graphics are pretty poor, the facial animations are especially bad. Some of the other animations too are baffling. There's a million currencies and a bunch of elements outside of the main gameplay loop just thrown at you. Controller controls don't work in the menus, which bugged me to no end. It just feels cheap and shoddy. I played a side quest that was just so boring, and you'd think early on in the game, try and get some entertaining content in there, try and pull people in. But no, it was such a waste of time. I'd love to see a full Unreal Engine 4K version of King's Landing, but it feels like this game has these locations in name only. It's a shame, as outside of some modding, we don't really have much in the way of Game of Thrones video games, and this doesn't feel like the rendition that we've been waiting for. Strong pass. Chains of Freedom is a squad turn-based strategy game set in a post-apocalyptic world. Think XCOM with zombies. It's pretty serviceable, it looks good, plays fine, nothing world-changing, but the story I found sort of interesting. Chains of Freedom has the central theme of fascism at its core, which is depressingly topical. Your squad of militarized psychos reel off numeristic, fascistic catchphrases while liberating the local population of lowly villagers and old ladies in headscarves en route to the real enemy. There isn't enough in the demo to know if this is played tongue-in-cheek and eventually sees you turn on the Sovereign. Fascists in the post-apocalypse aren't uncommon bedfellows, but you're not usually playing as one, which feels a bit gross. But then again, if it serves a narrative purpose later on, I can get behind that. The voice acting is also a bit all over the place. Beyond some of the unhinged lines and the one-liners, it gave me a bit of Garth Marenghi's Dark Place feel, with some of the voice actors doing great jobs.
Dr. Svetlov, a revolutionary with a vendetta against the sovereignty.
And others.
Intel says he's got mind control abilities.
Bye. Good gravy. A small bunch of objects are flying of their own accord in E-Wing.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of this game. But these are the thoughts that the demo left me with. Okay, let's get out of this uncharted and unusual territory. Back to the roguelikes. Into the Restless Ruins is set in Scottish mythology, so taking place in the country that I call home. I like mythology, I like roguelikes, and so I was in. And immediately confused. I don't remember any of this from Tam O'Shanter. Previously we've looked at Cryptical Path, which had a level building mechanic whereby you added rooms into the path of the level to reach the areas you were cut off from. Into the Restless Ruins has a similar mechanic where you have cards you wield to build new rooms with things such as combat upgrades and different configurations to connect together with different areas of the map in different ways. It's an interesting mechanic which I do like a lot, like I did with Cryptical Path, but here it feels quite different. Within the level you have a torch which lights the way, which basically dictates how long you have to reach wherever your chosen destination is, where you want to maybe unseal the path forwards and unlock new areas to explore the following night. When building, you need to be mindful of this to avoid running out of time and getting lost in the dark. Whereas Cryptical was very much solely about getting from A to B, here you're making a path that's reaching new areas but in a way that makes them traversable in your limited amount of time. You can add rooms with bonfires, combat upgrades and the like along your way to maybe allow you a bit more time to veer off course or make fighting your way back a bit easier. But run out of torch and you'll be stumbling around in the dark waiting to get winged. It's an unusual premise, the demo is quite limited, but a good proof of concept really. It'll be interesting to see what mechanics are added over time, what challenges the team creates with this setup, but so far, it's a solid start. A game that really surprised me was Asgard's Fall. Asgard's Fall bills itself as the first Viking Survivors game, which is kind of hilarious as Hordes of Hell is right there, having launched a couple of months ago, but maybe this is intentional as Asgard's Fall does kind of dunk on Hordes of Hell. This really shows the difference between graphics and visuals. Hordes of Hell has superb graphics, I can't take that away from it, but very little style. The visual style of enemies, attacks and powers are far more cartoony here in Asgard's Fall, but they have a lot more charm and character about them. Even things as basic as the menus feel so bland over in Hordes of Hell when put alongside this absolute gem of a demo. Where Hordes of Hell struggled to provide variety, Asgard's Fall already has dozens and dozens of weapons, a fully fleshed out upgrade system in a run where you have nodes that buff other nodes and unlock the potential in different nodes. It's a really interesting system. It's kind of like the trinket system from Rogue Prince of Persia that it launched with, but it executes it far better and has a couple of layers of complexity. With dozens of slots and far more upgrades with multiple choices when it comes to adding these runes, this system shines and allows for some quality player expression. There is meta progression, both in acquiring resources and an upgrade tree. How does this demo have better fleshed out and more emergent gameplay than another game in the genre that is still in early access? That is just super impressive so early on to be this far ahead. To compare them really isn't fair on either game. I'm sure if the developers of Asgard's Fall watched this video and saw me talking about another game as much as theirs in this section, they would probably not be too happy. But they're both inspired by Norse mythology. They're both survivor-like bullet heaven things, and when you put them side by side, it further emphasizes the issues that are present in one and thoroughly well thought out and developed concepts in the other. Other elements to mention in the progression, it does feel really impactful. Each character's moveset can change up wildly over time. You really do feel your character get stronger over the course of a run. And then there's boss battles, an area which many survivor-like struggle with, but Asgard's Fall absolutely nails with a boss which has a lot of different attacks, which all suit the style and the mythology of that character. It's really cool. It's a really impressive demo. Completely sold on this concept. I've wishlisted it. I'm so ready for full release. I look forward to seeing what all the other characters are, other levels, and just seeing how this game expands from here. Really, really impressed. A survivor-like where you control Pokemon. I mean Guardians. No, not like that. Having a survivor-like where you have characters fighting alongside you as your primary damage dealers reminds me, as we discussed a little bit earlier, of something like Bone Razor minions. I'm sure there's others as well, but Wildkeepers does its implementation slightly different. A, you're not completely incompetent in dealing damage yourself, so you're not entirely reliant on your minions. And 2, your minions have special moves which you can control and you can choose how and when you want to activate them. This adds an additional layer to combat. Comboing these moves can lead to different playstyles. Some creatures have great synergies, like where I had a dragon that was buffed by how many enemies were on fire, and a second creature whose special was to set, well, every enemy on fire. So 2 of them, I feel, at least, comboed together nicely. The upgrade system is solid with stat boosts per level and secondary upgrades available every significant milestone that either you or your creatures hit. A couple of negatives: some of the upgrades display a little bit oddly. I had upgrades which were reducing the cooldown of special moves, but the numbers were increasing, but in practice the cooldowns were decreasing, but it was just a little bit confusing. It wasn't quite right. And the cutscenes look like everyone's on a boat. They're just kind of bobbing around. Which, after that, and not a great feeling first round, I almost bounced off of this game. But I stuck with it, and I soon had an electric cat that exploded, destroying everything, and I finally got it. And then I got an upgrade to have 2 of these exploding cats. And each time they exploded, it healed the rest of my party. These are the sorts of crossovers and upgrades that I love discovering in roguelikes, and it keeps me coming back for more. This sort of change in gameplay loop or change in gameplay style, having these unique effects, really helps sell the whole concept as a whole. Even without its unique selling point of the monsters, the game is pretty solid as is. The combat is fine, the visuals are pretty too. They can get a little bit messy because everything's a little bit more detailed than your average survivor-like, but I still really like them. If the devs can flesh out some of this stuff, fix some of these descriptions and text issues, and introduce a few more levels, which there probably is, as this is just a demo, but you know what I mean. This should end up being a solid addition to the roguelike, survivor-like subgenre. I remember kind of dodging the Temtem survivor-like, but with this and Bone Razor minions having sold me on this concept a little bit more, I might have to go dig it out. But yeah, really great core, really great start. I'm really interested to see how this game develops from here. Hades clone is a term that gets battered around a lot in the roguelike space. Hell, even I compared Redacted to Hades a few videos back. It's an easy shorthand, you mention Hades and everyone is on the same page. So Reignbreaker definitely gave me plenty of Hades vibes when I first booted it up, but that isn't necessarily a bad thing. Once my Hades senses start tingling, I start to look for where the game diverges from Hades. And there are at least a few ways that Reignbreaker carves out a nice niche for itself. Reignbreaker is set in a medieval, steampunk, cyberpunk-esque world. The gothic architecture had me thinking of something like 40k, and that's never a bad thing. You play as Clef, a former soldier to the Queen of Keys, looking to end her reign, hence the title. Solid, clear setup. The combat itself is pretty fast. It's built around an interesting overheating mechanic. Clef is armed with a mechanical lance, which can launch ranged attacks, be slammed into the ground for an area of effect attack, or thrown for a charged ranged attack, which reaches a little bit further than your normal ranged attacks, depending on what sort of lance style you have, because you can get different attacks attached onto this lance. These attacks build up heat and require you to mix in some melee combat where Clef will box the jaw off your enemies, allowing the lance to cool down. As well as the heat system, there is a combo mechanic, which is a lot more forgiving than your average combo meter, which is something I like, with the time ticking down a lot slower, meaning that powers dependent on combos can be carried over across fights, and only really lost when you're hit, or take a very long time between strikes. The combat is really fun and keeps you on your toes, alternating between your lance and its ranged attacks or mid-range attacks, and your up-close melee boxing style. Pair that with a well thought out boon system, which allows you to buff elements of your arsenal, pulling you into different playstyles, and there's a lot to like here. It's a combat system which is really well thought out, but doesn't overly complicate itself. Fighting against the Queen of Keys means that the enemies naturally have a lot of keyholes to be unlocked using your lance as a finisher. Unlocking vaults spawns enemies, contributing to the unlocking paths moving forwards. You can use your lance to reset and arm traps, which is a cool addition to this sort of game. It ties into the narrative of this place and its trappings being familiar to Clef. I like it when things like that, when narrative and gameplay intersect. So gameplay wise, really solid. I like the visuals. The storytelling is good. I like the building to a big bad in these sorts of games. Some of the voice acting felt, no offense to anyone involved, a little bit amateur dramatics. It's not across the board, and Clef's voice actor is nailing it, but some of the actors that she's put across from don't quite hold up their end of the conversation. Solid demo. Another one firmly on my radar. I don't really have any issues here. It's a really solid roguelike, and I'm really interested to see how it develops from here. I do look forward to making a video with a thumbnail disrespectfully comparing it to Hades, only to blindside the viewer with everything we've discussed above. Look for that later this year. And that was most of the things I played during Next Fest. There were a couple others, but there wasn't anything worth talking about from them, so they didn't make it into this video. But what did you play during Next Fest? Let me know in the comments down below. Like and subscribe for another stack of roguelikes in one video. I'm already in pre-production for my next contribution to YouTube, so watch this space. And until then, look after yourself, take it easy. I'll see you next time. Enjoy your roguelikes. Bye-bye.